This is Andy Revkin, Columbia University's initiative on communication and sustainability at the Earth Institute and Climate School. But I'm here today with Barbara Taylor from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, for whom a prime concern for many years has been the fate of the Vaquita, the little cow, the world's tiniest cetacean, and a remarkable little porpoise tucked into the north end of the Gulf of California in Mexico. There's discouraging news, I guess, mixed with some hints of possibility, but the latest news seems pretty tough. And maybe you could just briefly describe what's going on.
Yes, well, the government of Mexico came out last week with an announcement of some what they call triggers for enforcement for Vaquita. And the problem with Vaquitas is, well, the biggest problem is there's only 10 of them left. And they're vulnerable to being drowned in gill nets accidentally. And the government of Mexico has had a law on paper that gill nets are illegal in this area now since 2015. And this recent announcement basically walks that back and says that they won't even start doing enforcement in what we call the zero tolerance area, where the last probably 10 or so vaquitas are surviving until there's at least 60 pongas in there setting gill nets. And so it walks back their commitment to trying to save Mexico's largest endemic mammal, which is really discouraging, that part of it.
We'll get to sort of the possible contexts there in a second, but could you describe what it's been like in the surveys that have been done there? When you see this species that is so rare. I know a lot of the research has been done acoustically because it's virtually, there's no way you could get an accurate count just by looking for fins and the like. So 2019 was the last sort of thorough survey?
2019 was the last concentrated effort that we had out there. And now, because they're so rare, I mean, you really are looking for a needle in a haystack. And they're always been a very difficult species to see. They're very small. They're about my size. Their dorsal fin is, like pretty tiny. You can only see it in glassy water. They don't jump around like dolphins. So they're a difficult animal to see, but they're a relatively easy animal to hear because they echolocate at a frequency like 10 times higher than bats. And they're sort of like the hummingbirds of the sea. They have to eat all the time. And so they're constantly echolocating. And so we hit upon this method of using these passive acoustic detectors that can sit down on the bottom of the sea for up to 3 months at a time and just record every time they hear a vaquita. And that just gives us a lot more data. And we used to be able to gather about 3,000 days of data every single year. And that's what alerted us to the catastrophic decline that happened starting in about 2011, when a fishery for a very large fish that is also endangered, but is highly valued on the black market in China, resumed, and the nets that were set for that fish, which is about the same size as vaquita, are the most lethal, and the decline increased from about 8% per year to almost 50% per year. And so, it rapidly became sort of a emergency room situation from the formerly hospital room situation. And so it's been a really long and tough fight, and we've lost 99% of the vaquitas in the last decade.
Incredible. And that the paper that was published with that data showing the map of kind of the quiet spreading in that area was really discouraging. It seemed like a map of silence, expanding silence.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we used to hear them basically throughout their historical range. And there were these, basically the vaquitas, for whatever reason, they live in this tiny area of really high productivity. And even within that area, they concentrate on these underwater ridges, which must be particularly good for them for whatever reason, presumably feeding. And, now they're down to just hanging out on one single ridge, which is right off of the village of San Felipe. You can see the entire distribution of the remaining vaquitas from, the top of a rooftop in San Felipe.
It's incredible. And I know for years there have been efforts or proposals for shifting the livelihood away from fishing and the like. How much of this is related to that supercharged value of the Totoaba's maw, the swim bladder? In other words, does that just render anything that could be an alternative unfeasible? Or it's not like they're just out there fishing for sustenance or local consumption, right? At least many people.
Yeah, it's a bit of a trickier situation than that. So so
many times that's the case.
I know. Before the Totoaba basically started to recover, which is what precipitated this, resumption of this illegal market. The primary moneymaker was blue shrimp, these spectacularly large and tasty shrimp. They bring the highest market value for shrimp of any shrimp that you can purchase in the United States. And most of the fishermen were making most of their salary off of shrimp, but they catch it with gill nets from small boats that are called pangas. And so that legal fishing was driving the decline that from 1997 to 2006, we went from 600 to 200. So we lost 400 vaquita with legal gill net fishing. But we were making progress. The government of Mexico had actually instituted a law that was transitioning fishermen from using gill nets to using small type trawls, which is the way most shrimp are caught globally. And they were partway through that process when the Totoaba market took off. And so it just, added on to this already bad decline and just made it, an absolute, catastrophic decline. And yes, now it's this twin thing of trying still to convert the fishermen to using gear that doesn't entangle vaquitas, which could be done because it's in a different season than Totoaba fishing. And Totoaba come up to the northern Gulf to spawn. They are only found in that area, so they're another endemic species. And it's in a very pronounced season, which differs from the shrimp season. So there's no reason that they couldn't be converting fishermen over to using sustainable type gears, but it's just not been happening. It really hasn't been a focus of particularly this current government. And because they cut off all compensation when the current administration came into the fishermen, which they were paying in the last administration, so they were paying fishermen not to fish. The fishermen, they still have their gill nets. They just went right out there and started setting them the way they had in the past, which is, it's just a stunning thing to observe, to see that much gill net in the water. I mean, every one of these little 30-foot boats puts out, like more than a mile of gill net. And so, it's just a spider web of nets out there. And it's really remarkable that vaquitas have survived as long as they have. Because they clearly know where the nets are. They have to negotiate around them to make a living and catch little fish. But, every now and then, they just make a mistake, and a mistake is fatal, usually.
So I was prepared this morning when I was catching up with these developments, a little belatedly. I was kind of prepared to write an obit. I've written a half a dozen or so human obits for the Times when I was at the New York Times. and I've written 2 or 3 pieces when a species has vanished. The Rab's fringe-limbed frog, the baiji in the Yangtze River, paddlefish in China too, and I started to realize it's almost become a beat. There are other reporters now. Between Einhorn at the New York Times, really her beat is sort of endangered or extinguishing species. But then an email from you and some other, I was looking at some of the factors and I realized maybe it's still not quite time to say, pull the plug on the money and time it takes to work on this one. So could you describe the glimmers of hope?
Well, I'll tell you about vaquitas first, and then, there are other species that I think contribute to, not giving up. Because if we do give up, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
There's no doubt that without humans stopping what they're doing, vaquitas will go extinct. So it's going to take some concerted action. So not taking action, in terms of changing the fisheries is definitely sealing their fate. So the last time we went out in 2019, we had the acoustic team that was, actually is a lot of fishermen that are helping us put out and retrieve these acoustic detectors. And they find basically where the vaquitas are spending their time. And then we go out with ships with, great big binoculars on them and great big cameras. And we go out to try to see the vaquitas and take pictures of them so that we can now try to estimate the numbers by actually knowing the individuals because there's so few of them. And one of the reasons that we can tell individuals apart is because they have nicks and scars in their dorsal fins. And those are caused by, at least most of them are caused by actual entanglements in gill nets that have ripped their fin, and the animals got out and survived. And when we tried to go out in 2015 and actually capture vaquitas, we had vaquitas that hit the nets and got out and survived. And, it was the first time that we knew that that could happen. And so now we've lost 99% of the vaquitas, and that 1% that's left, a lot of them have these scars from having been entangled in gill nets. And you have to think it wasn't a random thing that we ended up with these particular vaquitas. These vaquitas have had a lot of experience around nets. They've had some bad experience around nets, and maybe they're especially careful. And so that gives us reason for optimism, that these animals have learned the dangers firsthand. The other thing that
And what's it like? Sorry.
The other thing that really gives me hope is that of the 10 or so individuals that we managed to see in a pretty short time out in the last area where they seem to be spending most of their time, 3 of them had calves with them, and they were all the ones that we saw were fat and healthy, including the calves. And basically that means that, roughly half of them are, females. And, let's say of those, out of 5 females, 3 of them are mature females. Every single one of them had a calf,
Wow.
which, is really encouraging that these survivors are pumping out calves absolutely at the maximum that they possibly can. So, that gives me hope that vaquitas are doing what we've seen other species do. So one of the great examples, I think, and especially because it's a local example, is the northern elephant seal. So the northern elephant seal was completely hunted out of California and most of coastal Mexico. And it only persisted in a tiny number. Estimates are somewhere less than 30 of them, but nobody really knows, on an island that's offshore from Mexico called Guadalupe Island. And now there are over 300,000 northern elephant seals. And all it took was stopping killing them. And there's a lovely book that's written by Jane Goodall called Hope for the Animals that documents many cases, black-footed ferrets, condors, Pierre David's deer, many examples of species that once you stopped killing them, they were able to come back. And some of those, of course, were assisted because you could take them into captivity. But some of them, it was just, leaving the animals alone and they were able to recover. And we just did the full genome of Vaquita. In fact, it's the best sequence for any whale, dolphin, or porpoise. And we're able to look in detail at its genetics. And what the genetics suggest is that Vaquita have been naturally rare for a very long time, about 300,000 years. And they have low genetic diversity, but they don't show the signs of inbreeding depression that you see in species that have come from large number and gone down to very small numbers. And, it's a complicated signal to discuss, but basically it means that, all vaquitas have pretty low genetic diversity and they've had it for a very long time. So the parts of your genetic makeup that might get exposed by having close relatives mate with one another, like, cousins or, closer parents and offspring, they have survived having that. So they basically purged their genetic load because they've been at such low numbers for such a long time. And so there's no reason to believe, given that we're seeing healthy calves and they're having lots of calves, that they are vulnerable to any of these genetic problems that might be problems for other species, but are not likely to be problems for vaquitas.
Well, that's a really important place to maybe close things out for now. There are so many other questions related to what China could or couldn't do and could maybe do now to help at least finance some of this. And the United States, of course, has trade relations, and I know they've tried all kinds of pressure points and incentives, but it feels like this year is so critical. I mean, it's literally week to week, I assume, or at least through this coming season. Whatever happens on the water right now is probably not a function of global policy. So hopefully there'll be some way to thread the needle.
Well, yeah, it is and it isn't. I mean, Mexico has made a lot of commitments and, of course, is involved in many international agreements, including CITES, the Convention on the International Trade for Endangered Species, UNESCO, the International Whaling Commission, trilateral agreements with the US and Canada, all of which have sections that focus on vaquita and where Mexico has made promises to protect vaquita as part of their environmental standard agreements with international countries. And this latest basically walking back the protections of vaquitas definitely is contrary to those things. And those organizations, they're about preserving biodiversity. And so if they really are going to succeed at doing that, they have to respond in a timely fashion. And as bad as this pronouncement is, it was made in the low fishing season. I mean, it's hot as blazes right now in that area where vaquitas live, and it's traditionally the lowest time for fishing. There's almost no fishing that goes on in the heat of the summer, but the shrimp season starts in the middle of September, and I would hope that these organizations that are centered and focused around preserving biodiversity can, respond in a timely fashion. The time that the endangered species themselves, their clock is ticking. It's not waiting for the next meeting. And so, we can only hope that, that human can adjust to that time scale and do something before this actually takes effect in the middle of September, and certainly before Totoaba season, which starts in December. So there is a little time, but it's very little.
Wow. So this would be a really important time for citizens everywhere to press their governments within Mexico and here in the States and everywhere else to get serious about this. It seems like a critical moment for sure. We say that all the time.
Yeah, I know it's been a critical moment for a long time, but it only gets more critical. And, it's harder and harder to give these last few individuals a fighting chance. It certainly is the time to walk back what I think is a very unfortunate decision to basically give the nod to gill netting in their remaining stronghold.
Wow. Well, thanks, Barbara Taylor, for being here, and good luck with all the work you've done. Keep at it, and the team that's assembled and working on this is so impressive. So I'm here to keep pressing the case for action.
Yep. Thank you very much for covering this.
Thank you.